Hi, my name is Tiffany Boyle. I'm Head of Exhibitions here at DCA, and welcome to Soft Impressions with Helen Cammock, Ingrid Pollard and Camara Taylor. It's a cross-generational group show which at its core inquires into the artist's shared approach to printmaking. The artists individually are not known as printmakers, but they all have produced a substantial body of work in print. Across the galleries, there is existing work and a series of new commissions. The works span from the late 90s up until the present. All of the artists' work in print is contextualized within the other mediums in which they work in their practice. So we have film, video, textile banners, a mural, installation. Printmaking is a medium that was used in the historical distribution of ideas around race and otherness. And it's a medium that when I think about how it intersects with politics or political activism, I would often think of propaganda, very bold fonts. And here, the way that the artists employ it is in a way which I have called soft, hence the name Soft Impressions.
My name's Helen Cammock. I'm an artist and I normally work across a range of mediums, so moving image, print, performance and writing. So when I first came to Dundee, one of the things that I felt like I wanted to do was to walk around the city, get a sense of the feel of the landscape. That's about colour, it's about sound, it's about the sky. I kind of used two different trails, the Women's History Trail and also the Breaking the Chain Slavery Trail as a structure to start my walking. So before coming to Dundee, I was commissioned to make a film work looking at the beginnings of the cooperative movement, and that grew out of the mills in Rochdale and Manchester. That was my first moment of being in touch with Mary Brooksbank. Mary Brooksbank was born in Aberdeen but moved to Dundee when she was 8, and from the moment she arrived was a really politicised child, young person, adult, all the way up until the end of her life. In the labour movement, as an activist, she was a socialist, a communist at different moments. I knew I was coming to Dundee. What I wanted was to be closer to Mary Brooksbank. So it was a moment for me to go to the archive at the University of Dundee. And that really was the catalyst, this idea of coming from the outside in, walking the streets, feeling the energy of the light and the space, and then being in touch with the activism and politicised and collective action that came out of Dundee. I happened upon two poems, one called Courage, which is an incredibly politicised poem that is so resonating with the moment that we're living in right now that it felt like it had to be somehow in the show, rendered in its original form for everybody to read, because one of the things that I'm really interested in is this idea of cycles of history, and that histories are actually multiple and they keep coming around and they keep coming around. So the relevance of this poem that was written midway through the 20th century is really significant. It's rendered in its original form, laser cut into a large piece of plywood. The wood is a piece of everyday wood, wood that is used in construction, it's used in workplaces. Her words just jump from it. They're cut from it, but they jump out. Another work is a large wall mural using the first stanza of a poem called Solitude. It just really struck me. It sat with me in terms of my walking round Dundee, this idea of being the outsider walking, the idea of feeling a sense of unbelonging and belonging in the walking that you're doing. And this poem is about being by yourself, and it's about finding a space of solitude, and that there's a sweetness in that. There are a number of new commissions in the show. There's a screen print made in the print studio here at DCA. We have the laser etching also made at the print studio. But then we also have a large fabric banner which is hanging on the end wall. Fabric banners are all about collective action, protest, the idea of mixing up different kinds of narratives and stories within one kind of a frame. So this one has representations of both the road bridge and the train bridge across the Tay. It references weaving. In the woven thread, we also have the red and the black of Dennis the Menace. We have a representation of a sun, which is also a representation of an orange or a tangerine in terms of marmalade. And then we have a large triangular line which moves across the entirety of the banner, which really is referencing this relationship of the colonial structure, which Dundee was part of, Scotland was part of, the UK was part of. So, of course, as we know, that the jute that was made here in Dundee was sent mostly to the Caribbean to clothe enslaved people. So it's this idea of the connectedness about the stories and the histories that we share. Another of the works in the show is a 10-metre text work, which is a screen print, also done at the studio here at DCA. And really for me that was about being so moved by the poem Courage that then I wanted to write a response. And in fact, both the banner and the long-scale jute work are responses to both the city of Dundee and to Mary Brooksbanks. I have also made a screen print diptych, which is a montage of images of Frederick Douglass. He was an orator and an activist, and he came to Dundee in 1846. He was doing a tour around Scotland, and he spoke here about the Free Church and about the investment and receiving of monies from the plantation system in both Americas and the Caribbean. And it was a plea and a challenge and a request for the Free Church to send back the money and say, we don't want the money that has been built on the enslavement of others and the violence inflicted on other people. He talks about it as blood money. So there are two existing works in the show. One is a diptych, which is talking for me about the premise of this whole show, this idea of sharing the colour of thought. It's about ideas and thoughts and experiences that come together and have a conversation. For me, somehow it's an introduction to what's happening between the three of us as artists and with Tiffany, the curator.
My name is Camara Taylor and I'm an artist living in Glasgow, and I work with film and photography and text and installation and across a variety of mediums. In Gallery 1 I have a work called Untitled Familiar Document, which I made around 10 years ago through a process of moving an existing image around while it was being photocopied. And then for this exhibition I had to think a lot about how I wanted that work to be framed, or if it was to be framed at all. It's like a one-of-a-kind, in a sense, photocopy. And so after a lot of discussions I realised I wanted it to be framed on MDF with a walnut border, in some ways sort of mirroring a notice board, or like sort of pinned in that particular way, which I think it sort of has a delicacy, but also stays true to the sort of more ephemeral nature of photocopies and documents and these sorts of things. This exhibition is a chance to share some work which draws from my family archive. I think the thing about working with those sorts of archives and that type of material, be it photography or VHS footage or voice notes that family members send, it takes a different amount of time to figure out what you're making, why you're making, and if that thing you're making should be shared. And so with Nobody's Word, for example, the footage is from 2001, but I didn't digitize it until 2014. And the voice notes from 2018, but I didn't actually start editing these things together until about 2020, 2021. One of the first works you encounter in Gallery 2 is Untitled Redecomposition, which is a series of floor works as well as a silver gelatin print, which in different ways draw from and reuse the work of the African-American painter Robert S. Duncanson. In this exhibition, it's work which is bringing together like what was a new process for me at the time. So Duncanson's works are reproduced on archival museum paper and then submerged in a solution of rum, whiskey and water. And that process was something I'd sort of been thinking about bringing into my work, thinking about grief rituals and libations and how we pour one out for loved ones. But then when I first staged the works in 2021, I then realised particularly the sugar content in whiskey and rum means that not only does the image degrade as you would expect like inks to run, but also like mould accumulates and other bits of matter over the course of exhibition. I think that was a process that was really exciting and surprising. The exhibition also features a photograph of one of those works in a much later stage of the mould process.
My name is Ingrid Pollard and my medium is lens-based or photography, and usually it gets transformed into another form. In Gallery 1 there's a series of blind embossed prints which is an element of a work called 17 of 68, and it's made up of embossed images on white paper, so it's quite tricky to see them in the gallery space. Usually people have to spend time ducking and diving and walking quite close or looking quite close to the images to actually decipher what's there. It's just working with the idea of these signs, which are primarily from pub signs, which represent the African. They're pub signs, so they're out in the public, they're out in the air. It's the idea of being very hidden in a public place, because you do have to spend a lot of time looking very closely at them. Also in Gallery 1, there's a work called Belonging in Britain. It's a small 8-minute video, and it features texts from the 1960s of a migrant from the Caribbean to London. He's writing back to his wife about what he's doing and work. And in contrast, we've got her voice some 40 years later talking about their life in the Caribbean in London. So they're crossing the Atlantic visually and verbally. And what you see predominantly animated is images from the photo album, both in the Caribbean and in London. A constant theme with the work I do is the Atlantic and crossing the Atlantic in many directions, be that small boats, sailing boats. In Gallery 2, there's an etching of paper boats. They're very fragile and brittle at the same time. So I was just looking at what that means. Also in Gallery 2, there's wallpaper, and it's based on a toile de jus wallpaper, French wallpaper, and I made it during a residency in Normandy and Lancashire, so I was doing 2 residencies at the same time. I was interested in the quality of light in Normandy and the quality of light in Lancashire, and in the room I had in France, it had original toile de jus wallpaper, so I was surrounded by it for weeks and weeks. And the fact that they tell a story of land ownership and entitlement, and also in the back you often see the peasants working. So I was thinking about the idea of working both in a cotton mill in Lancashire, where I was also residency, and in France, because it was in a rural area. In Gallery 2, there's also a second wallpaper that was part of the commission for DCA. It was devised and printed through the very splendid technicians in the print studio. The repeated phrases from a book by Carmen Miranda Machado. During the flow of the printing, it gets transformed and becomes much lighter. I was able to work with letterpress, which I've always wanted to. So my father was a printer who worked with letterpress. It was an important element for me. Another element was enlarging the wooden letterpress. They're still integral wood, but they come something else through scaling and dropping back and adding different colours. So it's having that very basis of printmaking, but it's transformed and it takes on a different meaning. Even though we can see the letters A, B, C, they're talking about something else in their construction. In Gallery 2, there's a work called Regarding the Frame, which is looking at geology and mining in that particular area in Northumberland. And we're looking at the instructions for apprenticeships for coal mining and songs that recall coal from that area. So as well as looking at the landscape, it's looking at the cultural significance of particular elements. There's Graham Miles' famous song Sea Coal, about the people who collect the random coal that washes up rather than the deep excavation. There's also an element to do with the landowner from that particular area. His emblem is around in those works. There's always an element of research, investigation, which is an important element for me, and it's kind of exciting part. So I went to University of St Andrews looking at their collection, archive collections of the Valentine brothers, as well as looking at their geological collections and specimens. So I think across all the artists, that their investigation and research and looking at what's already existent is always an important element, because you can kind of rework it, join it together with other research.